Welcome to the Momentum Collective podcast. Momentum Collective provides training spaces and community around the world for unconventional minds and nomads to co-create the future. This podcast shares ideas on how we can transcend and shift towards our highest self. Hey everyone, John Early here, one of the Momentum founders at our artist residency in Sumbawa, Indonesia. Joined here by the incredible Shawn Heinrichs, who's been in-house with us the last week, sharing his message on ocean conservation and sharing some of the films and the amazing photography that he's done around the world and underwater in that world as well, and shared a beautiful meditation with us last night, and it's just such a pleasure to have you in-house with us, Shawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I didn't quite know what to expect when I came here, but I knew that if I just surrendered and showed up, something magical would happen. And honestly, the container that you guys have created here and the authenticity by which you present and offer, you don't force anything, and then everybody beautifully opens up into the sphere of receiving and giving, and I've just melted into it. So amazing. I'm in such a happy space. Yeah,
it's been so good to see you shine and share some of your work with us. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you came from to step into this this place of being such a big one of the big messengers for helping protect this planet.
Interestingly enough, I'm completely unqualified for my job, which is great.
Like all of us.
Right? Who went to school to create Momentum Collective, right?
Right, exactly.
I actually had my roots in finance and business development with a technology company. And in my work, I started doing a lot of travel around the world, and a lot of it took me to Southeast Asia. I was also sort of regaining my roots in the oceans as a scuba diver, and my hobby was photography. And being in this amazing part of the world, I started spending weekends when I was traveling getting back in the water. And on the one hand, it was amazing. I mean, reefs and fish and all kinds of colors like you can't even imagine, psychedelic greens and purples in the corals. And it was mind-blowing. But at the same time, what I also noticed was every time I went back to these spaces, the beauty compressed more and more into smaller spaces. And what was left around it was blown up reef, rubbish, fishing nets, and what used to be sharks and rays and all kinds of stuff. Over a few short years, it turned out to just be a couple of small fish. And it became highly relevant to me that we were losing the oceans in a hurry. Yeah. At the same time, my work in the cities, in the finance area, I started venturing out into some of the fish markets and into the dried seafood markets. These are in Chinatown and things like that. And I started noticing the manta gills, the shark fins, the seahorses, the pipefish, and just about everything that I had seen on the reef was in some dried container sitting there for someone to buy for either medicinal or for some kind of soup.
Medicinal, not even really sure what that means.
Yeah, well, yeah, pseudo-medicinal is what I call it, which means it's a health tonic that's purported to do something magical, but really it's basically flavorless dried skin. Yeah. But you can extort people and you can charge huge sums of money for something that's ever diminishing. Yeah. So I saw that happening, and I remember it started just rising in my belly like, I'm sitting here creating business, but what am I doing for the world? Where's my integrity in this process? And eventually what became sort of a side hobby, which was going out and telling these stories about what was happening, became such a passion. And I remember the moment where I was underwater filming this beautiful sea coral bommy, and I was like trying to not get the anchor damage there and the bomb damage there, and I was like, screw this. And I just turned the camera around and I started documenting the truth. And it was so liberating because it was like, I don't need to just show pretty pictures. Right. It's time for me to actually reveal what's really happening out here. And I suddenly realized I had the power to make a difference. And I took that camera, and again, with no training and no experience, I started traveling to these remote areas, and very quickly I was undercover in Taiwan in triad-run shark fin operations, documenting 10,000 fins per day being processed. And I was in north of Tokyo in Japan filming a market port where literally they brought 12,000 sharks in a day. Single day, 3 million sharks a year in a single port. Capturing that while slipping through security and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then down in Ecuador filming this beautiful community that had transformed with the depletion of its oceans from one of artisanal fishermen to drug dealers and shark fin traders. And just seeing the collapse of society around the exploitation that was happening. and taking those stories forward. And very quickly they were in BBC and National Geographic, and they were going all over the world. And it was really empowering because it gave me an opportunity to give a voice to this huge travesty that was happening in the oceans. Literally the serial depletion, the strip mining of the greatest frontier on this earth, but it was out of sight, out of mind. And I had an opportunity to really bring that forward. And ultimately, I had to make a choice. Did I stay in business, or did I put that behind me? And I realized I was dying inside. This was calling to me. It was calling to me to use my art and my storytelling for such an important purpose, which was bringing a voice to the voiceless. And I just remember that day where I just walked into the office of the CEO and I said, I'm done. Can't do this.
Yeah.
And I literally walked away from a massively lucrative career that would have set me up with retirement by now and all kinds of stuff, but I didn't want it. Retire for what? An empty planet?
Right.
And so I chose to become a working conservationist and filmmaker and photographer. And I never looked back.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I know you seeing a lot of your work, and you even premiered one of your films you're involved with, Racing Extinction, the other night. Is probably one of the most powerful things you can watch to really get a glimpse of what's truly happening. And it's hard to not watch that and not want to do something and not want to act on it. And so I feel like that's one of those things of like, what are some things that people can do?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's one of the most common questions you get. Or like,
Always.
okay, there's some things that are happening. What can I do? We feel like we're up against big corporations or big governments, or even, illegal industries in Africa or China or these places that we feel so far apart from. So
what can you do? It's a really important question, and it is one that I get asked a lot. And over time, my answers really evolved. And I think I've landed in a space now which I feel really good about. And the thing for me is this, is that there's a perception that there's a war happening out there, and that we need to show up with our weapons and we need to win the battle.
Right.
But violence begets violence, and we will never solve it with going to fight for nature. Nature doesn't need us to fight for nature. And one of the things, and I'm going to get a little bit spiritual and esoteric here, but I think it's super important, is the physical world that we experience is a manifestation of what's happening inside of us, individually and collectively.
Yeah.
And the war that is raging on nature is the war that's raging inside of us, that divorce that's happened between our true self and that connection with all that is real and pure. And so when people say, what can I do? Well, probably the most important thing is to really do your healing work. And that's one of the reasons I'm here in Momentom, is because you need to know yourself, you need to get vulnerable, you need to find a safe space where you can express yourself. You need people who are going to help you find that path, and you need to also make that personal commitment to that journey. So getting well, getting healed, and that means looking at your traumas and your triggers and your deeply held beliefs that aren't serving you, and really making the commitment to open your heart, open your soul, and let all of that toxicity that's held you back for so long, let that go. Give yourself permission to let go of that story, and in that process, recommit to showing up. First of all, showing up for yourself every single moment of every day. Then, from such a place of fullness and abundance. Okay, I've done the work, I feel healed, I love myself, I value myself, I feel that power coming back to me, because until you love yourself and hold yourself, you're never going to have that strength. Your foundation will always be shaky. Regain that foundation, regain that strength, showing up, and then show up for your community and show up for nature.
Yeah.
Because in that process of transformation, my spirit animal is a butterfly, and it's all about transformation. You have to go through a really dark tunnel and become ultimately vulnerable. When that caterpillar emerges from that shell and it's transforming into the butterfly, super vulnerable. But then it spreads its wings and it sails the winds of the earth. So in that process, you can let go of all the things that have been holding you back and really show up in such a beautiful way. And not only are you more powerful in the work you do, your service, right? That dharma, that way of showing up and not only serving yourself, but also caring for those around you, caring for the other beings, but you also have the ability to manifest just in your presence. Like, if you sit at the table with somebody who is eating well, consciously, looking after themselves, and in a very beautiful, spiritual, and healthy place, that person draws you in. And you're curious, and very quickly you can start affecting your entire community.
Yeah.
So imagine if you started accepting little puppies like this so beautifully.
Hey, Shepherd.
Hi, sweetie. But imagine if everybody started showing up like that.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have the battle against this and that, because people would be in a much more conscious, intentional state.
Right.
And instead of this accidental life where we run through kicking over trees and poisoning oceans and stripping out everything, we would be very conscious and intentional about these are the things that sustain us.
Yeah.
They're sentient beings.
Yeah.
This has a life force energy, this ground and this tree.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility as parts of this ecosystem
Yeah.
to serve it and keep it well.
Yeah.
So I think that is really what we can do. And then all of the other things like, getting educated, seeking out the resources, watching things like Racing Extinction, getting informed so that you can find your passion.
Yeah.
And maybe your passion is you're going to change how people in your community eat, from consuming all kinds of threatened species and also species that are really impacting the environment, to becoming much more maybe plant-based and much more healthy and more in tune with what is raised locally. It may be that you are more nomadic and traveler and you actually want to get out and start turning around things in remote parts of the world, bringing back power to communities so that they become, like indigenous communities, regain their control over their resources. And through that connection, they become the curators versus some large ExxonMobil coming in and extracting everything.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to be in service, but it comes from that deeply held space inside of you where you've got you, you're strong, and you're ready to show up for you and for everyone else.
I really appreciate that, and that's what really stood out for me with Racing Extinction as well, is that it brought in a few different perspectives, and it didn't just make it seem like us versus them in this battle. It showcased a lot of the beauty and made you want to help, because I don't feel like, I feel most people have so many issues and things within their own life that it's hard to then care about something else, or then the convenience that you want for these different things, and realize that no, hey, it doesn't have to be, doom and gloom, and it's you don't want to get people too depressed on things. I know you showcase a lot of stark realities of things and how animals have been treated around the world and the state of things. So it's kind of like you want to shake people up, but you want them to realize, hey, there are good things happening and out there, and like you said, coming to yourself first. Like when the masks fall in an airplane, you have to put your own mask on first before you help someone else, and I feel like that's very much the same with the planet, like you're saying. And the other parts that stood out for me for that was also just that mix of showcasing that art. I really appreciate how some of the messages that you took out, like, hey, instead of like billboards and signs and like shouting people you're awful and this is terrible, just how can we showcase the art and the beauty of these animals, showing these big projections on the Empire State Building and the sounds, and people can make, once people have that in front of them, how do you say no to that? Versus like meeting it, like you said, with that anger and that war, it doesn't seem to win people over too easily. So
I love what you're speaking to there. It really does come down to love. And I mean, you think about, you were born, hopefully if you were born into a good home, at least initially into love. And the most beautiful moments of your life are often surrounded by community or those loving moments and those connections. And if we think about how do we reach people and how we get them to want to be motivated to do something, it often comes from a place of caring and connection. So, Jacques Cousteau said, we protect what we love. So in this society where we've chosen to divorce ourselves from nature and we consider ourselves apart from nature, the invitation is to realize we are part of nature, an integral part of nature. And one of the most powerful tools is art in all its forms. It could be photography, filmmaking, painted art, it could be sculpture and music. These beautiful forms of art, and they seem to transcend race and culture and age. And it's almost like an invitation for everybody to come together and celebrate that beauty and to find their way. That's one of the amazing things about art. You can find your individual way of connecting with it. And in that connection, there's a bond that's formed, and there's something inside of you starts to grow, and you're like, I value this now because it speaks to my heart, and I always am seeking to speak to my heart. And so art has a way of sort of raising that frequency, and both individually and collectively, people are inspired. And there's a difference between trying to shame and guilt someone into something versus inspire. And the word inspire comes from that word to mean breathe in, inspire, right? You breathe in. So you're breathing in that energy. And once you're full, then you're ready to share it, right?
Right.
Where shame and guilt is crushing, and you want to withdraw and cower from it. And my work is focused on, instead of having people shocked and turned away, even if it's hard stuff, it's about fascination, and if it's beauty, it's about surreality, that's what I call it. Like, whoa, is that even real?
Yeah.
And I want them to lean forward into it. And the art of a good story is you become part of the author, the viewer. You get to unravel the mystery of that art or that image or that story while you're participating in the process. And so a beautiful photograph will take you in on a point, and then there's story and context around of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you create a story of, wow, this person fell off the boat and they landed right in front of this whale shark, or whatever your story is, and you now have a personal attachment to it. Mm-hmm. And through that and that connection that you form, there's a desire to stand up and now represent the support of the conservation of that place or those species.
So well said, and so well documented in that as well, of showcasing the story and the context of these animals, and making I don't want to say making them human, but making them easier to connect with. And a powerful part was near the opening of having one of the sounds. You hear this beautiful songbird, and he's calling out the oho bird, calling out to it was a male oho bird calling out to the female, not realizing that it was the last of its kind, and that call would never get answered. And that lands so heavy to hear, oh wow, how sad is that for this bird calling out, not realizing he's the last of his species, and calling out and really hoping for an answer that will never come. And it's those types of things that really help you go, wow, this is happening in real time right now. This isn't in our next generation, or this is happening now. And that immediacy of like, how can we act on these things now? And it was captured so well to tell the art and the story of the movements of the manta rays and these beautiful creatures. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel in that you something I want to bring up is, even right here in Indonesia, there was a town that primarily was based on hunting these giant mantas, and I think that's where it gets really challenging for us as foreigners, as people from the first world, the developed world, is to go up and tell villages, you can't do that, that's awful, how dare you, where that's their only option for a profession, or the only way to really raise a family, put food on the table, or bring some money in to have some shelter. So you're going in instead and providing them an alternative, not just shaming them and guilting them like you said, but going, hey, this can actually bring in more money for tourism. How can we bring tourism here and celebrate life rather than take it away and ship it out and have more money for other places elsewhere? And I think that's the biggest difference in really making change, is offering these alternatives rather than just pointing your finger and everyone else is pointing their finger going, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And so I think that's such an essence to how we start finding more solutions.
I call that rewriting the narrative. All tradition is based around story. Oral tradition, storytelling permeates cultures as far back as we can remember, because that's how wisdom is transmuted, brought forward, right? And communities don't think of just money. They don't just think of what they're excited about. They don't just think about families. All of your existence is wrapped up in a story. We live story lives, the pieces that come together, and that's our narrative.
Yeah.
And we have our individual narratives, almost like individual chords in a song, instruments, and then you have the orchestra, right, which is your community's narrative. And in order to change or rewrite the narrative, well, just like changing the song for an orchestra, you got to bring all the instruments in, and you offer a different set of notes and a different tune. And so with these communities, we go in and we need to talk about their narrative and say, okay, there's belief systems, there's what they love to do, there's how they make their money, it's how they interact socially. How do we create a story, a new story, that still honors the various components of what it means to be human and have that human experience in that narrative? Yeah. But we rewrite with them a new narrative that's even more nourishing. And it's a rising narrative that doesn't result in complete depletion, but increased abundance. And when they feel both the narrative that they're a part of and the rising abundance, there's a much more open heart to embrace that versus just saying, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because that says, okay, here's my narrative, and you're going to withdraw a key element of it.
Yeah.
Well, I can't hold that for too long because I still need to make money.
Yeah.
Or my men have pride as hunters. Take your pick. And rewriting the narrative, I think, speaks to a lot of change. It's not just like, how do I change a community in conservation? It's like, look at our lives.
Yeah.
We all have narratives about how we believe our lives are going and what they're about. And in order to have systemic, not point change, but systemic change,
right,
we need to change our narrative.
Yeah.
From one, in this day and age, one of scarcity and fear,
right,
and violence and all the things that are basically driving this ecosystem that we're part of into the ground, to one that's much more about abundance, one that's about vulnerability and connection and love. And with that, we all rise.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some things that we can do outside of, how do we change the narrative specifically for in the developed nations? Because I feel a lot of some of these bigger issues might be isolated more so in Asia and in fishing and different things. What are some of the big changes we can make in the developed world?
Yeah. Well, take the
narrative.
United States as a case study. We consume 40% of the world's energy.
Right.
Yet we have 4% of the world's population.
Right.
4 and 40. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
So our energy consumption is horrific already, right? But with that comes all of our consumption and all our disposal. If, just take US and China, if the average person in China consumed at the rate that the average American consumes, it would take 2.5 planets to support the world right now.
Yeah.
We don't have 2.5 planets, we have 1.
Yeah.
So we have a huge responsibility for what's going on right now. We can't just point the finger.
Yeah.
What's happening in America and Europe is sort of leading the charge of what's the biggest export from these developed nations is standard of living. We set the bar that all these other countries aspire to. And with it goes all the natural resources. So we need to really take a hard look at ourselves and say, okay, instead of being one of relentless consumers, we need to become one of constant conservers, like consume to conserve, which means really looking at 3 parts of our life: how we consume, how we dispose, and energy usage.
Yeah.
And in consumption, one of the most important things we need to look at is our diet, because between all of the characteristics of how we eat, particularly the meat industry, let's just look at that, it produces about 20 to 30% of global emissions.
Yeah.
Because of all the transportation and the forest being burned and the methane and the CO2. Like, let's look at your diet. Can you really reduce the amount of meat and long distance products that you're bringing in and try to eat more plant-based and eat more locally?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you have to go completely extreme, but reduce and conserve and focus on it, and it's also better for your health. And then in our disposal, we have the average, I think, product in America that you buy lasts less than a minute in your hands, because we have a throwaway society. Everything is wrapped and you throw it away. So really start to be conscious about what you're consuming in terms of plastics and all those things, because those all get disposed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then energy consumption. There's so many more energy alternatives available, either directly through wind-based or solar, or you can literally just choose within your energy company to choose solar to be the vast majority of the percentage of energy you consume, which puts pressure on the system.
Yeah.
And as individuals, we're incredibly powerful in that regard, because when I do it, and you're sitting at the table with me, and I go, no, I don't want that, and you go, why? Then you're now affected, and that one person can affect lots. And I think there's a study that came out not so long ago that it says it takes about 3.7% of the population to cause the entire population to swing. The passionate, motivated, driven 3.7%.
Mm-hmm.
So
the outspoken extrovert kind of.
The ones who are out there that are really going to move it. And so we don't have to change everybody, but if we affect just enough people, we can see systemic change happen, and it happens quickly when that happens.
Yeah, I think that's just it. And how do we glorify and celebrate these transitions? I was just in Malaysia. I was in Borneo for a week, and it was really interesting to see. I was expecting a bit more of an Asia place, but it was very super developed.
Yeah.
Malls everywhere, and it's almost like, like you said, we're shipping that standardized effect of that consumerism all over the world, and setting the bar like that's what it's to be. And I ended up going to into the jungle to try and see some of the last orangutans in the wild. And to get into this little reserve, you had to go past, far as you could see, hours and hours and hours and miles of palm oil plantations.
Yeah.
And how challenging that is. It's not just the oceans, but it's all these things woven together, ripping out the forests, putting these palm oils for cheap palm oil, which is in everything that we consume. And to me, it was really challenging to go, okay, I'm from a developed world because we've already exploited our places in other countries.
Think of the term, right?
Yeah.
Developed.
Yeah. And so how do we shake our finger? I was trying to tell, like, oh no, I don't, like, I can't eat palm oil, this isn't good.
Yeah.
But we're over there, it was three job options.
Yep.
Be a fisherman, you could work for a palm oil plantation, or the small tourism sector.
Yeah.
And so I was like, coming from this abundance of opportunity in Canada, where I'm from, I felt, how would I tell them how can I tell them really to not do this?
Yeah, and if you think about the United States, for example, at one point there were 100 million bison on the plains, and we eradicated them down to 27 that were preserved in one park.
Yeah.
Whoa, could you imagine this day and age? Like, that would be like going across the Serengeti with machine guns in Africa, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's less than 3% virgin forest coverage in the lower 48 states of North America.
Yeah.
Less than 3%.
Yeah.
So we've already taken almost all that is left.
Yeah.
And so when you look at these other countries that are coming online now, the big issue is not as much that they're having their learning pains, it's that their population in China exceeds the population of the entire world when Canada and the US went through their learning pains.
Yeah.
And so we can't afford to do that again.
Right.
So it's not about pointing a finger as much as just calling it as it is, which is, I'm sorry, it's great that you also need to learn, but we can't learn this way.
Yeah.
We have other models. Let me offer that model to you without judgment.
Yeah. And I think some of the work that I find really fascinating, you've gone through and seen some very horrific things. I'm not sure if there's any things you're wanting to share, but just how do you protect yourself from some of these things that you've seen?
Yeah. The work that I do at times can be incredibly dark.
Yeah.
And it's really spending a lot of time walking in the shadow.
Yeah.
And literally in the shadows, behind walls and closed doors and alleys. And some of the hardest stuff I've witnessed in China, for example, is going into the illegal wildlife markets. And just
legal or illegal?
Illegal.
Illegal.
But illegal.
Right.
They move around and they do their thing, and just seeing literally everything you might see in a forest, but also a lot of like kittens and dogs and everything else in just massive container stacks, just squished together and then violently killed while they're alive in a very torturous way because of some crazy beliefs around adrenaline in the meat and like the fur industry in Europe, and like just witnessing the wanton cruelty and just complete shut down beings that are participating in that.
Yeah.
And having to be also very guarded because you can't have outward displeasure. Yeah. And so showing up for that and like sort of wearing this armor while you're documenting and telling that story, and then leaving and just feeling so saturated with the pain and the energy and the suffering that's coming out of those spaces. And folks like me, we get into this work because we care.
Yeah.
Deeply connected to nature. I was the child that was eating on my dog food bowl with my dog, right? Or rescuing the ants from the boys that were trying to squish them, or catching the fish from the people who were going to kill them, and like that was my life. And then sort of subjecting myself to that level of horrific barbarity. Yeah, I have to be honest, there were some really dark times for me.
Yeah. Where
I had to really like go inward, and therapy and community and self-work, and it can be really, really soul damaging. But the good news is I feel like that was my work and my medicine, and I feel like I've done so much to push through that and honor how much it hurt, but also give it permission to like leave me and then fill that empty space that it creates with much more compassion and love, and basically recognize that what's happening again is the violence within being externalized, and that the folks that are the greatest purporters of that violence are really living unconscious, unintentional lives, and so they're just being reckless from that unintentional space.
Yeah.
And if they had the healing and they could bring back the intentionality, they would choose otherwise. And that we all bear collective responsibility for fostering the system that enables that. We need to heal together. So together we rise, together we heal.
Well, aside of the horrific things, what are some of the most uplifting things you've experienced working underwater or in nature or in seeing these animals, realizing that they truly are conscious?
Such amazing beings. Oh, I've spent hours with just a single manta ray swirling over my head for just closer and closer until its eye is just right there. And just, these animals are soul gazers. Their eyes are so intricate and so dark, you can see the light inside of them. And whereas we are very cerebral in our way we process, you can say they're absolutely pure. They look and it's like, I read
so
you.
Present, yeah.
I got you. I see you. And then they invite you to sort of try it for a moment. Can I show up the way the manta shows up?
Right.
Can I be vulnerable and expose my belly the way it does? Can I quiet my mind and then just let it transmit what it's wanting to share? And it's so many of the messages that we get reinforced in places like this about becoming more present, about becoming more vulnerable, about inviting in curiosity, about being playful. All those nuances about your personality that when you embrace those traits, you feel that rising. And just like the manta is this angel soaring through the oceans, after I spend time in their presence, I feel that lightness and I want to fly. Yeah. And that's when my little butterfly spirit kicks in. I'm like, oh, thank you, Mother Nature.
Yeah. So what's your next on your hit list for being able to swim or live or be close to or capture another animal or another space?
One of the most incredible beings in the oceans that I've spent time with is the orca, killer whale. And I've had some of the most crazy interactions with them, but they're fleeting because their populations are in a desperate state. Yeah. Naturally low already, but now in horrifically suppressed conditions with poisoned waters and food supplies that are just collapsing. Yeah. I've been calling it in for a few years. I've been close to get back in with them. It hasn't quite landed yet, but I know I'm putting my attention out there and I'm creating space. So universe, if you're out there, I'm waiting for those orcas to come back into my life and those highly intelligent sovereign beings to give me that huge download of beautiful whale wisdom.
Amazing. Yeah. Perfect. What are some other experiences that really stand out for some of the work that you've done? I guess not just the down stuff, but where have you felt you've actually physically seen the most change?
Yeah. Well, I have the good fortune of working on all the different levels from a single fisherman somewhere remotely to communities to regional and national governments and all the way up to the international plane. And one of the more exciting victories, and I say victories because in the moment it feels like it, but really it's an important step towards further conservation, is a organization called the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, acronym CITES. And it's a United Nations group of some 183 member nations. And I think there's 220 something nations in the world, so it's the vast majority of the world that have signed up to this treaty. And what this treaty does is create binding protective provisions that species that have been brought in and voted into protection status are given. And if they are protected, either the trade has completely eliminated them or it is highly restricted. And all member nations are bound to adhere to those provisions or there's consequences. They can be removed from the treaty, they can have sanctions and things like that. So it's the only binding international treaty of its kind. And in 2013, we took manta rays to the convention to try to get them listed, and everybody said it was impossible because we were hugely deficient on normal data that you need. But we had enough information that demonstrated this incredibly vulnerable species was deserving just innately because of its biological characteristics. And in the face of corruption and greed and bribery and all kinds of stuff that happens on that level, the international level, we succeeded in the first time at bat in getting a vast majority to vote in favor, and we got the protections passed.
Amazing.
And since then, we've got some 40 other species of sharks and rays in the last 6 years listed on that convention. And so we're making huge headway, and that treaty is not an end, it creates the possibility for further conservation. So then we're going back to these nations and saying, how can you do a better job in your homeland and your home waters? Protecting in communities, how can you benefit from the conservation? How can you, through tourism or better sustained ecosystems, how can you benefit? So it creates the possibility that didn't exist before.
And you've seen other places that have become protected or celebrated through tourism and other eco, and seen them start to flourish,
Yes.
correct?
Oh yeah.
Because life does want to be created and thrive.
And especially the oceans.
Especially the oceans.
Wow, the oceans have such a huge regenerative capability.
Yeah.
There's so much productivity. It's imagine if food was floating in our air.
Yeah.
That would change this entire terrestrial existence. Oh, right. Here blows in some bread and here's a shake, right?
I'm calling some blueberries right now.
Right? So in the oceans, it just floats in the water. So the productivity is on orders of magnitude higher than land.
Right.
And so if you just give it a chance, just a little space, and you let some of those key species have a home there, the recovery can be absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
Stunning and mind-blowing. And when you see it firsthand, the walls of fusilier fish, the giant manta rays soaring in, the sharks patrolling beneath, the turtles nibbling on the reef, the coral structures rising from the beneath, and the blue water with the sun rays chiseling through, you realize we already have heaven. Heaven is all around us. Yeah. We just need to give it a chance to really be in the abundance that it's seeking.
Yeah. Where can people find some more information for some of the projects that you're involved with?
So I work with an organization that I founded called the Blue Sphere Foundation, and there's a website and Instagram for that. I'm also a co-founder of a massively successful communications organization called SeaLegacy.org. And we have these incredible founders, Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, and together we've brought these organizations together. And then another foundation I work with that is also coming into our collective is called the Lonely Whale Foundation, and they've headed up the charge on ocean plastics and been really successful in eliminating plastic straws and all kinds of stuff from a lot of the food chain that we deal with. And so there's three great places that people can go, and you'll see a lot more of my work, but more importantly, a much bigger community that's coming together to do incredible work. And our vision is to try to bring all of us, you, me, and this entire international community, into a single movement where we value these terrestrial and marine resources intrinsically, and we feel that deep connection, and from that place of connection we desire to protect and serve for not just ourselves but for all of nature. Absolutely.
I mean, we're so connected. We're breathing in every second breath. We're breathing in oxygen that was created from the ocean.
Yes.
And so we are dependent on these things thriving as well for us to thrive. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done and the light that you've been sharing and across all these species, and bringing that art and celebration, and realizing that these places and these animals and these waters are sacred just as much as anything else. So aho, thank you so much, my man. And it's been a pleasure to have you here, a part of our project, and I know it's not the last time, so we're looking forward to having you back in our community again soon. And I know we've got a talk, I think, with you right now at 3 o'clock, so
perfect timing.
We'll just keep the conversation going. So
keep
thank you so much. We'll keep it going. John Early here with Shawn Heinrichs. Thank you so much for being here and tuning in and helping put some of your intention into to put these initiatives into place. So. For more info or content from Momentom Collective, or to apply for one of our international artist residencies, visit momentomcollective.com. That's Momentom, MOMENTOM. The Momentom podcast theme you're listening to is the track Beam Me Up by our friend and producer Arterium. For more eclectic soundscapes, find Arterium on SoundCloud.